I'll start by saying psychedelics are a major topic and a major force in the world right now, and it's becoming more and more into the mainstream, as I'm sure everyone here is recognizing. So you all know what psychedelics are. I don't have to explain that. I just want to explain the term psychospiritual really briefly, which is the confluence of the mind and the spirit, or psychology and spirituality. And spirituality can be kind of a touchy topic. And so I invite you, even if your worldview lies more in the realm of atheism, physicalism, by spirituality, to me, that just means understanding sacredness and honoring the sacred. And that's it. So it doesn't need to have a woo-woo component, and it can be thought of symbolically too. Okay, so the idea I want to introduce is this idea of becoming who you are, which is to say, becoming the person that only you can be, and the person that you know in your own heart that you want to be. So there's the idea of individuation, which is a term coined by Carl Jung, and it means to become who you are. And I think of it as a sacred task. And it is sacred because it's not ordained by any system or ideology or way of thinking or external force. It comes from within by virtue of being a human being. We all carry this task of becoming who we are. This is the task of individuation, which to me is the central psychospiritual task of being human. So this is something that it's something that is kind of almost paradoxical. You know, how do I become who I am? I am who I am. And this works with a certain yin and yang of forces that we'll examine. And so first, I just want to explore this idea of the tension of opposites, because one way to think about individuation is it's a harmonizing of opposites to bring forth the unified essence. And the idea is how to become a whole self. So it's the integration of the conscious and the unconscious. So I love this line from Terence McKenna, who's a psychedelic philosopher. And he said that the essence of understanding the world is to be able to hold a logical contradiction in the mind. So the ask is, can we do that? So this symbol, this is the symbol known as the Taijutsu, and it's the symbol of the Tao and of yin and yang. And to me, to my mind, this is the most true symbol that humanity has yet divined. It's beautifully elegant, simple, and impossibly complex at the same time, which is appropriate. It depicts how in everything there's a duality and a wholeness. And in all places, there's a tension of opposites. And any duality we can think of maps onto this symbol: being and non-being, self and other, identity and difference, order and chaos, so on and so forth. So we can take one of those pairs just by way of examination of this symbol, and we can say order and chaos right? So the symbol shows that they're opposites and they are one, and they're distinct from each other, and each contains the other's essence. And the symbol is of a swirling. So order is always becoming chaos. Chaos is always becoming order perpetually at all times. And it's a circle. So there's no edges. It's a symbol of wholeness and distinctness. And it's a symbol of harmony and balance. So what's the relevancy here? That the project of individuation is learning how to look out into the world and see this symbol in everything. So the prime polarity of this individuation, which again is to my mind, the central psychospiritual task, the polarity is between the ego and the self with a capital S. And this is another Jungian term that you are probably familiar with. So let's examine these ideas. So the ego, we all know, is the aspect of our psyche where our conscious awareness lies, where our sense of identity resides. The self is much more complicated and nuanced, but again, in the Jungian psychology, it's considered the center of the whole psyche, both the conscious and the unconscious. And actually, I think the term psyche is a really appropriate term to express the idea of psychospirituality, right? Because psyche, it's understood to refer to the mind, but psyche also means soul. And so it's the mind and the soul as one. So this idea, our task is to create an absolutely original center in which the universe reflects itself in a unique and inimitable way. This is a way of speaking about individuation. The self. So this is an explanation of this idea of the self. And again, it's one of these concepts that's difficult to put into words, but I'll just read this quickly. The self is the embodiment of the totality of the life of the organism. It is the architect of wholeness. What is monitoring your biological equilibrium as you read these lines? What moves your emotional and mental responses? What provides constancy when consciousness is distracted or asleep? A larger presence, which we all intuited when we were children, and then lost contact with, moves and directs the total organism towards survival, growth, development, and meaning. So again, this is a complex idea, but we can think about, there's ways that this is referred to in our culture. Otherwise, this idea of our highest self or the deep self, the true self. But it's one of these concepts that's ambiguous by nature because it is numinous. It can only be seen through the corner of the eye, but it can be fully grasped by our knowing. And so the function of the self is to move beyond our ego consciousness into a deeper connection with our meaning. And this is through facing the totality of ourselves and not just the layers that the ego represents. The process of psychospiritual development is bringing the ego and the self into dialogue, bringing what's unconscious into our conscious awareness, both in ourselves as individuals, but also into humanity at large. And I'll talk more about the kind of larger cultural implications of all of this. So by doing this, we get to express our own individual uniqueness meaningfully and authentically. And thereby we give the world something crucial that it otherwise could not attain. Okay, so this is very much in the philosophical domain, and now I want to bring it down more into the practical domain. So our world needs to wake up. I think we all doing this kind of work, we all recognize this. Our world is dreaming, so to speak, and it's been lulled to sleep by this sickly sweet lullaby that our culture has presented to us. And so we're dreaming this dream that is actually self-alienating rather than self-affirming, rather than self-edifying, which is what a proper dream should be. And this isn't to make a value judgment that dreaming is bad and awakening is good. Both are necessary. It's, there's a yin and yang in that as well. But it's important to recognize that we are unbalanced in our current state in the direction of dreaming or sleeping. The dream, the idea of a dream, or what a dream represents, is this unparalleled access to our unconscious. And the psychedelics offer something similar. The culture that we're in has these systems that it's this constant ebb and flow, but these systems grow and they take on their own life, and then they outlive their usefulness, and where we get swept up in them. And so we move through it like a dreamer being forced to face the terror and beauty of a situation that seems out of our control. But when you awaken in a dream, then you bring your conscious awareness into the domain of the unconscious. And so it's that interplay, that conversation. And this is, lucid dreaming or dream yoga is a way of describing this process of bringing your conscious awareness into the dream. And this is one way to dialogue between the ego and the self. But we're here right now. We are being asked by our circumstance to awaken, which is to just continually deepen our awareness. So that's the ego coming to deeper and deeper awareness of the self and entering that dialogue. So then psychedelics are like a lucid dream that you can enter just by taking the dose. They put us in touch with the unconscious and the beyond. And it's through mediating the ego, dialing it forward, dialing it back. And when we have our egos dialed back or even dissolved, which can happen at higher doses of psychedelics, we're able to see the true nature of the problems that are facing us in life in a way that we can't otherwise see based on our narrow confines of our ego consciousness. And we can see the problems, and we can see novel solutions to the problems. And so to me, our current culture, the central problem we're facing is alienation. So Terence McKenna says the cost of sanity in this society is a certain level of alienation. And perhaps you have felt this yourself. We're living in this world where there's this surprising and unsurprising increase of all of these maladies, mental health maladies that are kind of skyrocketing, especially among the younger people. And at the same time as this is happening, this psychedelic renaissance, as it's being called, is also emerging in lockstep. which is interesting. So the scientific world is now really taking seriously the prospect of psychedelics and studying it to help people with anxiety about death or their depression or curing PTSD. But I want to emphasize these are not simply medicines for anxiety, depression, trauma, these sorts of things that they're being utilized as treatments for. This is what the scientific world has to study and profess, because they need to have models and collect data and present data and move through this very particular way of showing that these things are efficacious, when the shamanic world has been utilizing these things for millennia. But so the psychedelics are not actually medicines for depression, anxiety, trauma. They are actually medicines for the soul. It addresses what underlies all of these maladies. And the sickness that the soul is carrying right now is alienation. So, to my mind, our culture that we're living in is self-alienating by nature. It removes us from the sense of being embedded in community, in nature. It removes us from our feeling of connection to our own bodies, from our connection to our sovereignty. And so we walk around with this general feeling of alienation, and we take that and we oftentimes we say, oh, that I feel like something's wrong. That must mean there's something wrong with me. But that's the thing, is that there's actually nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us. We're living in a culture that has a sickness. It's carrying a sickness, which is not a judgment to say, oh, this culture's sick. It's a diagnosis, because this culture devalues our connection, our communion, our imagination, our connection to nature, to ourselves. So these cultural systems, I just want to emphasize this point, these cultural systems, they have their own momentum. They carry forward, they transform, just like a biological organism is influenced by the milieu of its environment. The cultural systems as well, they take on their own life and they move forward, they transform. And we're amidst culture, so we get caught up in it. So where do the psychedelics come in here? So our culture is, having us carry all of this stuff that is not necessarily ours. And this is an aspect of just human psychology as well. We're laden with all of this stuff that isn't necessarily ours. So we want to allow ourselves to understand what is actually core, what is at the center, what is indestructible in us, so that we can release that which is not actually ours, that we don't need to carry. And again, this is finding the center. This is finding the center, because there's all of these aspects of us that are flung far out, and they may be chaotically strewn about. But when we are in our center, it's like holding gravity, that all of these aspects of ourselves then come into a harmonious orbit around. Actually, I want to say a little bit more about that. This idea of the center, being centered, what this feeling is like to be centered. You feel confident in your skin. You're not feeling confused. You might be in a flow state. You're feeling wholly yourself, and it feels good. So this is the goal, and this is what one thing that psychedelics can really help with is not just getting to the center and understanding where your center is, but helping to live from the center. And again, dissolving all of the things that have been accumulated that are not mine, are not yours, are not ours to carry, allowing ourselves to lose ourselves, so to speak, over and over again in order to truly find ourselves. And this is becoming who you are. You choose to allow yourself to die, allow these elements of yourself to die, so that the true self can blossom. It's like the winter comes and kills off all of these aspects that are not core. And then the spring comes and the blossoms of the buds of life are there. And this is finding our way to our true selves. So the psychedelics help us bring clarity to where we might be obstructed, so we can work on integrating the aspects of ourselves into their proper place, bringing them into that harmonious orbit. So I love this series of lines from Jesus. If anyone wishes to be a follower of mine, he must leave self behind. He must take up his cross and come with me. Whoever cares for his own safety is lost. But if a man let himself be lost for my sake, he will find his true self. What will a man gain by winning the whole world at the cost of his true self? So again, our culture pushes us into this mode of winning the world at the cost of our true selves. And what's being asked of us is to leave this feeling of safety that the ego craves by doing the hard work to dissolve the ego. Because we live in this world where comfort is a currency, and which comfort is beautiful. It's great that we have such access to that side of things in this, in this particular world that many of us live in. But it can also be that sickly sweet lullaby that is lulling us into a dream that we don't want to be dreaming. So if we lose our ego in pursuit of our true selves, we will find what we're looking for. And this requires not simply living from a place of comfort or from the safety of being successful. So it's also important to note that ego is not an enemy by any means. It often catches a lot of flack as a concept because a lot is attributed to it, but ego is part of the equation. It's part of the yin and yang. It's important. So we need both of the aspects of this duality, of course. But our world is suffering from an imbalance in the direction of ego. And because of that, we've accumulated a massive shadow. And so the shadow is another Jungian concept that I'm sure you all have heard of and are familiar with. So Jung says the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. So the shadow, it holds that which we can't see about ourselves or that which we're unwilling to look at. It's a part of the psyche that holds these unrealized aspects of ourselves. And oftentimes things get pushed into the shadow in our psyche when we're young and we can't fully face it or integrate it. We don't have the strength of ego to actually face it. So it gets pushed into this dark place that then is acting on us in our lives as we move through the world in all of these unforeseen ways. But this is the ask of the shadow actually is to face it so that we can integrate it. It's not meant to be just this repository for darkness. It's actually asking us to face it so we can witness it and we can harmonize it. So, Jung identified integrating the shadow as a crucial part of the process of individuation, of psychospiritual development. Because if it's not integrated, then we project it onto others and we identify all of these things that we see as being wrong with this person or that person. And actually, what I'm disdaining in another person is something in me that's hidden to myself. And that's why it irks me so much. So it's to confront the shadow is to look at what aggravates me about other people and to ask, what does this say about me? Not what does this say about this person? What does this say about me? Listening into the darkness and excavating, trying to find what is asking to be integrated. This is the task. This is the ask. So the thing about the shadow is that they operate, or the shadow elements operate on the same principle that is apparent in dreams. And so this illustration, I think, is just a brilliant and simple explication of what I see as just a absolute true psychological principle. And again, we see this in nightmares. Oftentimes in a nightmare and a bad dream, something is chasing us. It's like just around the corner, or we feel this impending sense. It's coming toward us, but we can't exactly see what it is. But we're afraid, so we run from it. And so that's communicating that, oh, this is something to be ran from. It must be terrible. It must be terrifying. And so we become engulfed. However, and I've had this experience exactly in dreams, and perhaps you have as well, where when we turn and face that which is chasing us, it invariably it transforms, and it transforms into something we can handle. In the act of turning to face it, we prove that we're courageous enough to face it. And by proving that to this unconscious element, it transforms, and it always transforms into something we can handle. And this is a key psychological principle as far as I've been able to discern. So the psychedelics, we oftentimes or sometimes we can come in touch with darkness. But this is helpful because the darkness is where the shadow resides. And in a psychedelic journey, for those who have experienced that, you may know that when we try to turn and run from that which is coming up, it can be overwhelming in a terrifying way. So again, the ask is to turn toward and face, and this is where we can integrate. And this is the task. So integration is the central psychospiritual task. So we hear about psychedelic integration. This term is out there a lot, and oftentimes it feels like it's a kind of a vague or a shrouded concept. But again, it's because it kind of has to be, because it's dealing with the mysterium tremendum. It's the same as individuation. It's dealing with the numinous, the transpersonal. So there is an element of mystery to all of this. And it's not because people are trying to keep something from you. It's because the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. And again, this is an image that has been very helpful for me, is thinking of the psyche as a galactic swirl, or as a solar system, or as a planet in itself, whatever scale you want to, or an atom, whatever scale you want to think about it on. There's the center, and everything else is swirling around the center. And when things are integrated, it forms this beautiful unity. Looking upon this galactic swirl here, it's impossibly beautiful. And so this is the task, is to hold the firm center, hold that center of gravity, so that all of the aspects of us naturally come into harmonious orbit. So Jung had this idea that actually most problems are insoluble. Most psychological problems are insoluble. Most problems are actually insoluble. And however, this isn't to invoke despair. It's actually to, again, emphasize the importance of integrating oneself, of developing oneself psychospiritually, of individuating. Because when we can reach that higher level, then the problem, which was all consuming us, actually we can put it in its proper perspective and see that it's a storm off in the valley. And this is something that psychedelics allow us to see, is putting things into their proper perspective, allowing us to reach that higher level, to ascend to that mountaintop, so that we're not overcome by the storm. We're not caught up in it. The storm still exists, but we can see it. We can put it in its proper context. So trust is an element of our culture that is sorely lacking, and we see this in many ways. People who are unable to trust themselves become lost. And the truth is that we all carry an inner knowing that we know what to do. We each know what to do. So finding our way to trusting ourselves is crucial, because we do know what to do. And if we can really listen and pay attention, then we will see what to do. So I love this refrain from Bob Marley. There's a natural mystic blowing through the air. Natural mystic. It's invoking the tension of opposites, the natural and the mystical. And their confluence, the confluence of those things, is what moves through all that is. And the natural mystic is blowing through the air. It's moving through a medium that is invisible, but one which we can hear and we can feel. Even if we can't see it, we can feel it, we can hear it. And then if you listen carefully now, you will hear. So if you pay attention closely and immediately, if you listen carefully now and immediately, you will, not might, you will hear the message it carries. So this is showing that we all have access to this knowing that requires our attention to recognize it. And this is through our intuitions, through our dreams, our meditations, psychedelic experiences. We can tap into this knowing. And this is the dialogue with the self. But it requires attention. Our world is full of distractions. I know you feel it. It's oppressive, actually, how distracting our world is. It's really hard to live in this world where our limbic systems are constantly hijacked and our dopaminergic systems are overtaxed all the time. It's hard to just sit in silence without music going or a podcast or a show. It's, our world's doing us no favors in this regard. So it's asking for us to sit in a state of attention so that we can listen. And if we can listen carefully, then we will hear. And if we hear, if we listen, if we pay attention, then we will know how to act. We all carry this knowing within. So the psychedelic experience allows us to remember. It's actually a remembering. And maybe, again, those of you who have had this experience, I think would recognize that a lot of these downloads, so to speak, that we get in the psychedelic experience are rememberings. It's like, oh yeah, I already know this and I forgot. And it's because we do know. It helps us remember who we are and what we're here to do. This is one of the great benefits of the psychedelic experience. And Bill Hicks, the comedian, referred to it as squeegeeing your third eye. And you clear out the lens that gets blurred up by virtue of being in this world and collecting all this dust and detritus. And we clear the lens so we can see clearly, because we know the truth is that actually we are already whole. This self-alienating culture creates this distraction, but actually we're already whole. T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." So this is we see this spiral, the path of life, the path of psychospiritual development. It's a spiral, and it's always moving. If we're doing it right, if we're walking the path, we're always moving closer and closer to the center. And we may feel like, oh, I've been here before, but it's because we're passing at a deeper layer, passing the same territory at a deeper layer. So we have to constantly learn the same lessons in life over and over. But if we're walking the path properly, we're moving ever inward toward the center. And this all comes down to responsibility. I think really taking responsibility for our own psychospiritual development. And if we can do this, then we not only honor ourselves, but we honor the other. And that's spirituality at its core, I think, is honoring the sacredness of life. So fellowship, this isn't merely, we're using the term individuation. This isn't merely an individual task. We're all here to do this for ourselves and also for the collective. And we have a responsibility to ourselves and to the collective. But it's important to recognize how interconnected we are. And again, the psychedelics, this is one of the central messages, as far as I've received, is really facing the reality of how deeply interconnected and intertwined we are. And this is to, again, bring it to the cultural level. Everything depends on how many individuals are conscious and personally related to their inner selves, and as a result, do not project their shadow onto others. That and only that is capable of preventing an outbreak of mass hysteria and mass delusion. You know, that's on one level, that's like kind of a scary thing to face. But we see this in various ways, the mass hysteria, the mass delusion. And the way to remedy this is doing our own individual psychospiritual work. I'm convinced this is the way. It's not to point fingers and blame and say you're the problem. It's to recognize that when we do that, we're actually pointing in a mirror and saying, what about me can I change in order to change everything? And this is what awaits us when we do this. We gain luster, we radiate, and something overflows, and it overflows into the collective. So just by doing our own work, we change everything. We change everything because of how intertwined we are. I'm going to speed up a little bit so there's time at the end here. Without the conscious acknowledgement and acceptance of our fellowship with those around us, there can be no synthesis of personality. Relationship to the self is at once relationship to our fellow man, and no one can be related to the latter until he is related to himself. This cannot be done in the vacuum. You know, it's a cliche, no man is an island. But this is what it takes, is communing and fellowship. And this is the world that awaits us, really, truly, if we can tap into this. Now the slave is a free man. Now all the rigid, hostile barriers that necessity, caprice, or impudent convention have fixed between man and man are broken. Now with the gospel of universal harmony, each one feels himself not only united, reconciled, and fused with his neighbor, but as one with him, as if the veil of Maya had been torn aside and were not merely fluttering in tatters before the mysterious primordial unity. This is not just a pipe dream. This is what awaits us if we can get ourselves into alignment. And again, this is my task to attend to my own domain, to integrate myself. And by integrating myself, I call everything that I touch into its own integrity. And if we're all doing this, moving through the world, we're pulling everything into that harmonious orbit. You know, one of the lies, and I'll end with this, one of the lies that our culture imposes on us is that we're in competition with one another. We're actually not. Competition is relevant to games, and it has its place in that context, but this is not a game. We are in this together, working together as stewards of this planet, as stewards of humanity, our fellow beings, the infrastructure of everything that exists, and everything that we have inherited that we didn't ask for. We're stewards of it. And so if we can go out and become a great steward, then the little piece of the cosmic garden that I tend will flourish, and I'll flourish with it. And so again, the psychedelics are the best tool we have, and tool is a limiting word and perhaps inappropriate, but they are the best option that we have for this psychospiritual development, for bringing ourselves into integration, for bringing harmony to the larger culture and to the world. And so And it's also not something that everyone needs to do. And only, I think, people who truly feel called from within should interface with it. But if we do, then we can help to change everything through changing ourselves. And this is stewarding the world. And so thank you for your stewardship.